the whole idea that humans, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will, that's over.
And that exemplifies how they see us and how expendable we are to them, and propagandize us continually. Because like you said, art doesn't need propaganda and truth doesn't need propaganda.
That's right.
And propaganda just never gets old.
Yeah.
They just change the set, they change the characters, but it's the same thing.
The ultimate tool for social engineering and leads to that relativization of truth. And the truth about truth is, it is what it is, and you either bend to its will or you live a lie.
And because us as Bitcoiners, you know, we've come to realize that, wait a second, if money is just words, the words of the government, then endless words are required to sustain.
Yes.
Endless words are going to be required.
Just like any lie, right? You got to keep building. You have to put another layer on top of it, layer by layer.
And that's why it's so important, back to the whole title of the show, to define money, to define what it is to be aware.
Are you comfortable with the fact that your money is going to start wars? That your money is going to propagandize children for gender identity?
For our kids, we're very adamant about teaching them early on about privacy, especially due to the fact that they're surrounded by all their friends who are constantly on social media. Everything's put out there. So, you know, there is a part of us that really wants to instill in them the fact that they need to be sovereign over the data, their personal data that they put out there, and to understand that concept. And I think they're both 10. So like, if you learn that early on, it's going to stick with you. You know, when we were growing up, we didn't have social media. We didn't even have that option, right? So for us, it was more like, don't talk to strangers. Don't give them your address. Don't tell them where you go to school. And that was it. And it was simple. And now it's like, oh my goodness, our parenting has just escalated astronomically in how difficult it is to not hover over your kids nonstop, but I think, you know, instill in them the parameters that they need to have as they grow up.
Right.
So that's why they got really excited when they saw this. We're doing it for them.
The privacy is fantastic. My daughter's only 6.
Oh.
So I haven't gotten to the social media stage quite yet. But I am actually very concerned because it just seems it's already extremely complex. Managing your own social media life as an adult, especially in a relationship and friends. It's really changed the nature of being a social animal in a way. And I don't know what challenges it's going to present as a parent. What do you guys, are they on social media yet?
No, we're not either with our personal names or anything, but no, they're not. And, you know, we've had the conversations with them that they need to know when and if they do, and they make that choice, and we allow them to make that choice, they have to be very responsible. Once you put it out there, it's out there.
Yeah, forever.
Can't take it back. And it's so much more important, I feel, at this stage to really teach them, first of all, know what friendship is. You don't need to put everything out there for everybody in your class to know. You know, if you've got a friend, learn the art of conversation, learn to engage with them.
You don't need 1,000 friends.
You don't need 1,000 friends. You know, that's not, you're not running a business. You're not doing, exactly. That's not friendship. So it's interesting because we see having that conversations with your kids and not just telling them, no, you can't do this. What are you filling it with? Don't watch so much TV. Okay, but you just left a void. I can't do that, but have you explained to me what I should do? Let's go outside. Let's go for a walk. You know, let's go identify the trees in our neighborhood. Like, let's do something else. You can't just say, no, you can't have social media. No, you can't be on social media. Explain, take the time to explain. That is paramount because everything, you know, in our world has been basically, you know, filtered down to like a Twitter, post or something, right? And a nugget of information, but a kid they're not ready for that. That's okay for us, but they need the explanation. They need the time for you to take to explain the why.
Yeah, I think one of the best parenting tips my mom gave me when I became a father was to just articulate every action that you take around your child from the time they are born. Just because they're already encoding, you know, they're matching language to action. And that's how they come online linguistically. And then two, there's studies that show infants are imitating people, but largely their parents, 36 hours after birth. Like they're already imitating your facial expressions, your movements. So they're becoming you immediately, basically.
Yeah.
And if you can be thoughtful about your actions and then tell them what you're doing, that helps them, I think, just come online more smoothly. But that doesn't stop either, right? It's like you're saying, well, even when they reach this age of whatever it is, 10, 15, whatever the age, when you're considering letting them on social media or telling them not to be on social media, you also need to give them an alternative not that's imposed, but you're actually telling them the why, right? That you're giving your kids, I mean, this is the philosophy basically, right? It's like you're asking, this is like what do 3-year-olds do all the time? Why? It's like they're trying to establish their philosophical bearings to the world. And so if you just tell your kid, no, because I said so, we all know how dissatisfying that answer is.
And they'll look for it elsewhere.
Well, if you just tell them no, you're not making the subconscious conscious.
Yes.
So when you sit and you had an excellent, recent about Gerard.
Yeah.
Is it Gerard?
Rene Girard, yeah.
Gerard. So when you sit and tell a kid, hey, we don't want you to get on social media because there are all kinds of harmful activities taking place on social media and some you're not aware of. And propaganda works on a subconscious level. We're trying to teach our kids what is propaganda. And part of that is because, we come from Romania and our families lived under communism. So propaganda was something that we just grew up knowing exists, and it's all the time, it's ever pervasive and it's everywhere. So when you tell a kid, hey, you want to play outside because you can prevent yourself from being infiltrated by data miners and nefarious people, you're telling him, he understands then, okay, there is a danger there that now I'm conscious. So I don't fully understand what a data miner is, no, because I'm 10, right? But our son definitely understands that there are, people that have bad intentions.
Right.
And those are not just individuals, but they can be systems, corporations, softwares. Right. That's what we're trying to teach.
Yeah, that's so important. Because again, those subconscious or subliminal influences, if you make them conscious for the child, then they can take responsibility for
power,
what they're consuming, even seeing through what they're consuming, perhaps.
Exactly.
Again, we're back to the complexity of raising a child in the social media era. I feel for you guys. Before we'll jump into some stuff here, you guys have been Bitcoin content creators. You made a bunch of films, which we're going to talk about. But now that we're on the parenting thread here, do you have general advice for new parents about raising children in this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main emphasis that we put as parents is, first of all, teaching our kids that their nature. What is the nature of person, right? You talk a lot about definitions of things. And a kid is not too young to sit and tell them, hey, you have a dual nature. You have a physical nature, and that's the one you probably are aware of, and you hunger and you thirst, and we feed that nature. But it's very important to understand you also have a spiritual nature. There's a part of you that's not physical, and you may not be aware of it, but it's there. And not only is it there, but in fact, according to the Bible or to esoteric traditions, the spiritual nature is the primary nature.
Yeah.
And the physical nature actually is a reflection of the spiritual nature. So, I mean, it sounds complicated, but we also teach a 4th grade Sunday school class. And that's another reason we're in disguise, because, a lot of the ideas that we would talk about here would be considered heresy, maybe in the evangelical church that, we attend, right, with our children. And so, teaching, we notice something, that the children don't have any concept of the spiritual, even though they've been raised in the church, they've been going to Sunday school, and when you tell them, do you know that you're also a spiritual being? They don't understand what that means. So we've been putting a large emphasis with the children on helping them understand, because see, Christ said, let the children come to me. He said, don't turn them away. Why? He said, unless you become like these, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And what was he saying? He was saying that children, before we socialize them and reprogram them and educate them, children, while they're not aware of it, they are actually using their spiritual nature,
right,
their imagination and the wonder and the belief. that they have is basically their spiritual mind manifesting. And as we propagandize them and put them in school and sit them there for 8 hours a day and start to teach them, we basically educate that out of them. And so one of the things we try to do is reverse that process. You know, we don't keep our kids in the public schools. You know, they learn at home. And we're able to, in a way, reverse propagandize them, counter propaganda, you know, where we teach them what we believe is the truth. You know, we are divine beings. There is a divine realm. We have a dual nature. And a lot of the problems in the world are because we ignore one side of our nature and we only feed the physical side of our nature.
And additionally, I think also, again, going back to taking the time to explain, and how you referenced what your mom told you when you became a parent. Symbolism. Symbolism's so important for children as they're growing up to really understand that there can be a hidden meaning behind certain things, right? Yeah. And that taps back into their spiritual nature. I mean, how else are you going to truly understand what it means to be a spiritual being if everything is literal? Everything is, you know, like when we learned in school how to do our first science project, right? And everything had to be the data had to be very clear. Everything had to be very clear cut. So again, going back to taking the time to talk with your kid, even if they don't understand the concept at this time, you've planted the seed. And why is that important? Because you can't give your child a full-grown oak tree. You can't. You have to give them the acorn. You give them the acorn, let him or her plant it. Let them see the process and the growth and the proof of work that goes into that acorn and into, you know, everything falling into place to make that tree grow into an oak tree that is around for 300 years, right? As much as us as parents would want to give a full-grown oak tree to our kid, right? We can't. The best we can do is give them that acorn. But if you just give them that and never talk to them about the process of what it takes for that to grow, will that acorn ever sprout? Will it ever turn into a tree? Will it stand up the hurricanes and the storms of life? I don't know. Right. So that's...
And we're not, and if we don't teach our kids, because we have parents who say, why would you tell your kids about symbolism and esoteric stuff? Because they don't really understand it. Well, you know what? When they're watching Disney movies, esoteric messages are being inverted and weaponized against them. And you see some of the messages in these movies. Like there's one movie where the fear of children powers a society. This is a Disney movie. And these little monsters, their job is to keep the kids in fear. And, you know, I was reading the description. I wanted to watch a movie with the kids. And I'm like, is this a real movie? Or is this some kind of like sci-fi, like dystopian? You know, I couldn't believe that was a movie. The fear of children powering a society. And when you think about some of the things that have recently happened in our society and how children were involved on a global scale, it's absolutely frightening.
Is that a newer Disney movie or an older one?
I think it's Monster. I don't know when it was made. Not sure it's Monsters, Inc. or something with the monster.
One of the things that we have learned with my daughter is that the newer Disney stuff seems to be sort of off limits because there's always weird, wokest, kind of ingrained messaging. Some of the older stuff seems to be okay, like The Lion King when I was growing up, like that still feels pretty wholesome. So but trying to again navigate that swamp is a whole thing.
And that's another thing as parents that we have to find ourselves doing, really looking at the content they watch and looking at the older stuff. King Arthur is great. The Lion King, you know, there's certain the imagery and the symbolism was very positive. They weren't trying to destroy our children back then, like it feels like they're trying to do with the new messages.
Which is when it's true to the original mythology. Like even in The Lion King, it has kind of the twin brothers mythology encoded into it. When it's true to the actual mythology, it seems to be pretty good and wholesome. But when the production studio or Disney starts to kind of bend it to some propagandized message, not only does it make worse movies, like they're just actually not, they don't stand the test of time, as propaganda tends not to, right? Great art stands the test of time, propaganda does not. But it's also clearly poisonous for your child, and it's going to subvert their development one way or another. So spiritual, like this word, first of all, that's a beautiful metaphor, I think, the oak tree. It reminds me of, someone said something like, those who plant the seeds of trees, knowing that they'll never live to sit under their shade, have started to begin to understand the meaning of life. You know, it's like living life beyond yourself
Yes.
is kind of the point. In the Bitcoin community, we talk about low time preference, and that's sort of what that similarly embodies, you know, doing things for the long run. And the more you think about the long run, well, the less you think about yourself, or the more you start to see yourself as a much smaller part of a much larger whole, basically in terms of time and space. And the word spiritual, like people, it sounds like this mystical thing, but I don't actually think it's that mystical. I think it's very practical. One of the definitions of spirit that I really like is, I think it was Heidegger. He said the I that is in we and the we that is in I. So that when you're growing up as a child, you're internalizing other people, and your personality becomes a composite of all these other people you've internalized. Back to Rene Girard, like you're largely imitating other people. So your personality becomes a composite of that. But then you're also a component of their personality, and they're internalizing you, and that we're all engaged in this mimetic process of personality development and maturation. So there's like a spiritual ebb and flow between us all the time in that sense. And the other definition, I think this is from Peterson, he says spirit is a pattern that propagates independent of a substrate. So it's just this pattern that's moving through us all the time, right? Whether it's at the genetic level, it's at the embodied level, it's at the rational level. There is this kind of constant flux of activity between us. And if you're not, again, if all of that's unconscious and you think, oh, I'm just a meat sack moving through space, then you're going to be subject to all, you'll never understand the conversations beneath the conversation. Exactly. So you'll be vulnerable to being played in all these other ways. So why would you not raise your kids with that information? I mean, obviously maybe that's too advanced or technical, but you want to help them along towards that at some point.
Eventually reach that point. Yeah. Exactly.
And really it ties back for me on a personal level. So I was born in Romania, in Eastern Europe. It was still communist at the time. And my parents had the same exact role and narrative that I find we have now so many years later with our children. What does that mean? They at that time had to basically fight against the propaganda that was trying to do exactly that, remove the spiritual, remove the fact that you are a godly being and you have a creator and you have a God and you can have a relationship with God, and replace it with the state, right? Yeah. It's the state and that's it. Yeah. And so it's fascinating and at the same time terrifying that we're seeing the same narrative play out today, when we thought, coming to the United States and being in the city on a hill and being in this land of dreams and everything, we would never encounter that again. Yeah. And here we are encountering it again. Yeah. And propaganda just never gets old. Yeah. They just changed the set, they changed the characters, but it's the same thing.
It's more insidious now, because see, under communism, there was a very authoritarian kind of government would just say, you're doing this, there's no whys, just do it. But now everything is masked. It's kind of, the Bible talks about the psychological profile of Satan, and it says that, he masks himself as an angel of light. Yeah. Right. And now, for example, in our world, when you look and see that every single war is dressed up to be some righteous cause that all of us have to get on board with. And the leaders tell us, just one more war. They've told us in my entire lifetime that I can remember, just one more war and everything will be okay. We need this next war. And so the propaganda is addressed, whereas in communist times, they said, religion's illegal. There is no God. If we catch you, my grandfather was arrested over and over again for having baptisms in his church. Wow. And for having sermons. Yeah, for having, it was illegal, and they were not allowed to meet. And so they would come and take him out of the house in the middle of the night. So they would always do it to impose maximum psychological terror on you. And my mom's traumatized to this day, because so many times the secret police, Securitate, the Romanians would call them, would enter their house 2 a.m, take out my grandfather, and basically hold him for 3 or 4 days, interrogate him till we told you not to do a baptism. Why are you propagandizing against the state? Jeez. And else they would have kept him in jail. The only reason they didn't keep him in jail is because he was a war veteran. And after 3 or 4 days, and he was shot in the head, and he survived, and he had a wound in a glass eye. And after they'd keep him, he'd pull out his eye and he'd put it on the table and he'd say, I took blood for this country.
Wow.
I took blood for this country. And even then the Securitate themselves had to like step back and say, okay, don't do another baptism. And this is a cycle that just kept on going until they were able to escape. For us, that was the first escape hatch, was both of our families leaving Romania. I was fortunately born in this country, but she came a little later, so she had experienced her childhood in Romania. And I just think of her childhood versus mine during that same time, how different it was. I'm growing up in Chicago, Illinois. She's growing up in Romania and fighting the state machine, waiting in bread lines, just constant struggle for survival, some of the most basic things, what ideas you have in your head, when you can eat food, properties confiscated, forced into the war. Yeah, my grandfather fought in the war, but he was forcefully drafted to fight in that war. He was forcibly drafted. And in that time, Romania was on the side of the Nazis, so he was even worse. He had to join and fight on the German side in the war, force by force. So the tyranny has become more sophisticated. Now we opt into it.
Yes.
We opt into the censorship, right?
Yeah.
We say, hey, give me some free Gmail. Yes.
Here's my data.
Click.
Right.
But we don't understand that there's an all-seeing eye now in everything that we type, right?
Yeah.
And that's what led us, later we can talk about money changers in the temple, but for us, it's not the physical act of Jesus going into the temple and flipping the tables. Because in my view, and in our view, everything Jesus did, literally, fine, that's important, it happened, it didn't happen, we can all argue about the literal parts. But in my mind, there's absolutely no doubt about the symbolism of what he did, that it's so powerful, it's so infinite. And Jesus was warning us. He said, guys, the money changers are going to invade the temple. But he wasn't talking about the physical temple or the church. He was talking about the body, which is the temple of God. And it's an unbelievably prophetic, statement and act. That's why he was so violent. We never stop and ask ourselves, okay, Jesus was this perfect indiviected.
Yeah. The only
He
time
literally
he was
cursed
violent.
them out.
Yeah.
He literally cursed them out, right?
Yeah.
And he literally
Physically,
acted
overturned the
upon it.
tables.
So I think he was saying the body is the temple of God. God lives within each of us. What is the church? The church is not the physical structure that we build. It's not the Catholic Church or the evangelicals. It's a decentralized group of believers across the planet that have made the unconscious conscious, in the sense that they have realized that God lives within them and that they are more than just a meat going through the physical universe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautifully said. And then, again, there's the Christ revelation is so interesting because, again, back to Rene Girard, how his perspective on it, not to say that it's just that, but the fact that Christ made the process of mimetic contagion conscious to us, that all the mythologies prior to that were based on collective violence against the victim, but the victim was always assumed to be guilty. And then Christ was like this inversion. We're saying like, oh no, it was the same story told from the perspective of the victim. So in doing that, it like revealed our nature to ourselves.
Exactly.
And it's just mind blowing. The farm at Okefenokee is a revolutionary new regenerative agricultural community. It features an 8,000 tree olive orchard, which they use to make their own olive oil, as well as a very large pecan orchard. All the animals on the farm are heritage animals, with some varieties over 100 years old and others thousands of years old. Fresh eggs are produced daily by the farm's chickens. Also, there are over 1,000 beehives that pollinate the over 200 heirloom fruits and vegetables and provide honey to all the residents. The farm makes its own molasses, unrefined sugar, herbs, and spices. The farm also features an herbal apothecary and a commercial kitchen. These are just a few reasons why the farm is the healthiest place on earth. To learn more about the healthiest place on earth, go to okefarm.com and use discount code BREEDLOVE for $21,000 off custom cabin pricing. Again, to learn more about the farm at Okefenokee, go to okefarm.com and be sure to tell them I sent you. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. Clearly, propaganda is a central theme to our conversation and your work. Can we, one of the most useful definitions I've heard of propaganda is something like the attempt to make one group of people forget that another group of people are human, right? So, and during pandemic time, we heard the terms thrown around like anti-vaxxers.
Yes.
In other eras, there have been, you name it, right? It's any label to dehumanize people. I'm not even going to go through them right now, but there's been plenty of them across time. But it's always some label assigned to people, and it's there's a lot of nasty verbiage put around those labels, and then it's ultimately building towards war, typically, right? Or at least some genocide or some
hatred.
Inhumane action towards humans. But it starts with the language, right? When you stop calling them human and you label them anything else, that's the first step in that process. How do you guys think about propaganda? How do you define it? How do you talk about it to people that may just hear this word but not have a deeper understanding of it?
It's a good time to bring up Davija.
Yeah. And before I do that, one of my childhood stories that stays with me to this day is that the propaganda that obviously was being just, bombarding the people of Eastern Europe at the time with Soviet propaganda, right? And my grandfather, to go back to kind of like the ancestral line here, but my grandfather, he also served in the army, and he would take his radio, blast Free Europe. Now, for those of you that may not know what Free Europe was, in the 1950s, the United States actually had a radio station that was blasting propaganda, but good anti-Soviet propaganda at the time, into the Eastern European nations. It actually, it was funded by the CIA, but then it actually even went on to be translated in 15 different languages. And what were they doing? They were basically giving news from around the world, but also news from inside the country that wasn't produced by the state, right? So that way you knew what was going on in your own country. So that was good propaganda. But what he would do is he'd open his windows wide, he'd put the radio right there and blast it on the street. And of course that gave so much anxiety to, the rest of the family, because of course he would get notices and warnings and all of that. But going back to propaganda, I think there's that element of exactly what you said. It's about dehumanizing others. It's about making them the they, right?
Yes,
we are the us
versus them,
but they are they, and it's so much easier than to just let that dislike, that hatred, that everything to just bubble up inside. And it's very easy to be able to not see them as victims of war or victims of this or that, because it's them. It's them, it's not us. And I think it also ties into how we see history and how we write it. And one of the things that I worked on when I was a student was I went back to look at the literature of Eastern Europe, and specifically a former Soviet republic, which was the Republic of Moldova, and to look at the poets of that nation, which were the national poets, considered the national foremost figures of that nation. And there were two of them that I specifically looked at their works, Grigore Vieru and Nicolae Dabija. And I did personal interviews with them, translated some of their works, which had not been translated into English. And one of the most powerful poems that Nicolae Dabija wrote was referencing the history textbook or the history manual that's taught in schools. So we want to talk about propaganda and how I define it. I'd like to read one of his poems.
Please.
Because I think we're seeing, again, the same narrative play out in a lot of what we're seeing for our children. So this one is called, and I'll skip some of the stanzas, but it's called History Textbook. History textbook, you whore. I open you and I feel sick. You craved your own glory, not that of your nation. The children you gather around are confused. Why do you rob us? On whose ancestral bones do you tread in May when plowing the land? The children who read you, absorbing your every word, why do they hate their own history, ignorant of where they came from? Why do you lie with truths? Why do you cheer when one should weep? These pages written in ink when our past is penned in blood. Why do you humiliate us, absorbing us in silence, as though we wandered through the world like blind kittens? Sometimes an uncle whispers to me, pray not, nor should you mourn at the stiff wooden altar built from the planks of a scaffold. Gather the holy wheat in sheaves, sprinkle the ancestral sod with beads of sweat. Rising across the valleys, nailed stars pierce the heavens. Time flees like a chill, the gallop of a restless stallion. As for the teardrop taken to the auction, let us weep it until the end. Pitiful textbook, teaching us all things and yet nothing to no one. Give us back our dignity so that we may believe nothing of what you say.
Wow.
So I would say a lot of what we see in our schools, right? What we see on the media is that propaganda. It's the way that it's being manipulated to serve whatever the agenda is. But it's cyclical, and we see it coming around again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very powerful. And it seems to me like the core, and we've tried to phrase it like this on the show before, but this core realization that because human beings are rational, we have language, capability of language, we're highly programmable. Yeah. And so that's simultaneously our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. Particularly our greatest weakness if we're not conscious of that programmability, right? Oftentimes when people are very dogmatic or certain in their beliefs, it's like they think they've found the answer and that everyone else is wrong. And then it's very easy to get into that us versus them mentality, right? Mm-hmm. It's we have it right and everyone else has it wrong. And even Bitcoiners, like we're not immune to this, right? We have to be careful as well. Whereas if on the other hand, you are, strong opinions loosely held, you're a little bit more, I guess you've made it more conscious. Your programmability is more conscious to you. So you can actually look at yourself and see, well, where have you maybe fallen prey to propagandistic programming in the past? And then therefore take responsibility for programming yourself, right? Who you spend time with, what books you read, how you think, etc. And this has been, painfully acute in my own life recently, like the whole war in the Middle East, that I bought the narrative that was fed to us in the U.S. that, oh, it's this interminable, ancient religious conflict. There's nothing we can ever do about it. And we're just going to keep sending money over there forever. And now, going through the past few years, and thank God for Bitcoin and Bitcoiners sort of educating me, and my wife educating me on this. It's not that at all, right? It's just the latest land grab in human history. And so that's all fueled by propaganda, right? Like there's literally a video of Netanyahu saying like, this is the blessed path and this is the evil dark path. And it's like, it's almost cartoonish supervillain like. And like how, if people that if they understand their programmability, they'll look at that and be like, this is a complete farce. This guy's full of shit, right? But if you're not aware of that, then maybe you're more likely to fall for that. Absolutely. And thinking that, no, you are on the blessed side. You are good, and these people are evil and do need to be exterminated. And and then what fixes that? It's like, again, Christ, right? Love thy enemy, which is something saying like, trust the unknown, don't, you can't, even if it is your enemy, even if it is us versus them, you still should not label them for extermination, right? That's fundamentally anti-human to the core. And so, yeah, all of this lesson is like bound up in the Christ narrative. And I think that's too why you saw during the pandemic, the places that had more religious conviction had more ideological resistance to the possession of statism, right? New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they were completely possessed ideologically by statism. Miami, Nashville, Austin, well, not so much. Like as soon as I landed there, the pandemic was over because people believe in God, not GOV. So it's very practical. Like it sounds like we were just sitting here, I don't know, praising, being religious or Christian or whatever it may be, but it's not about that. It's about this fundamental like action-based thing that no, like you are a human, you are programmable. If you don't understand that, then you're going to be programmed. And somehow religion doesn't have to be Christianity, but wisdom traditions and generally inoculate you against that threat of ideological possession.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And when you look at what they want us to believe, why do they want us to not believe in God? Why do they want us to believe that we're just a meat sack? And that's because they want to hollow us out, because then they can put themselves in, right?
Yeah.
If they hollow out the spiritual, and that's why it's this aggression. I believe is it Yoel Hariri that
Yuval
the
Harari,
great prophet of the New World Order,
author of
right?
Sapiens.
He famously said, and I just can't get past this quote. He said, "If you cut a man open in two, you will not find a soul there."
Yeah,
crazy. And that exemplifies how they see us and how expendable we are to them. Because you're right, it's not about religion. It's not even about Christianity, I would say, even though I am a practicing Christian and I believe in the Christian narrative. But I would say it's about divine order or no divine order, right? And because all ancient peoples believed in a divine order.
Yes.
There are no ancient peoples that said man comes from nowhere. Yeah. He just evolved here and he has no soul and he has no free will. And, if you cut him open, there's nothing in there, right? No movement, that's a modern idea. It's a very modern idea. Yeah. And so in my opinion, with kids, but going back to kids and to adults, it's like we need to get back to understanding there is a divine order. We don't need to argue about what that divine order is. Right. Because we can just agree the guys who don't believe in the divine order are trying to kill us. Yeah. They're trying to brainwash our children. They're trying to kill us. They're trying to take everything on the planet for themselves, rent it back to us. Yes. Right. And propagandize us continually. Yeah. Because like you said, art doesn't need propaganda and truth doesn't need propaganda. That's right. Right. And so the first thing when you hear about propaganda, it tells you that there's an unsustainable idea at the root of this. Right.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
And because us as Bitcoiners, we've come to realize that, wait a second, if money is just words, the words of the government, then endless words are required to sustain. Yes. Endless words are going to be required.
Just like any lie, right? You got to keep building. Yeah. Once someone discovers the original lie, you have to put another layer on top of it, layer by layer.
And we teach our children that. Like, we know you lied, but you try to teach them that now you have to keep lying. We know you lied, and I'm going to sit here and listen to how you're going to take that lie And you're going to eventually reach a place where you realize, I just can't lie. I can't continue it. There's too many things I have to remember. There's too many,
Yeah.
And so if money wasn't created by words, and I think that's why the Bitcoiners have taught us so much as a family and as an individual. And that's why we talk a lot about the consciousness shift that Bitcoin creates, because when that becomes conscious to you, and that subconscious thing, which they want it subconscious, they don't want you looking at the symbols on the money. They got some strange symbols that nobody can decipher. And they certainly don't want you to be able to understand what the Fed funds rate meeting is all about and why the entire market is just sitting there waiting for a guy's words to come out of his mouth. And then the market starts flashing and moving. And when that becomes conscious to you, all of a sudden now your consciousness has shifted.
Yes.
And now, just like we talked with the kids, now that's an acorn. It starts as an acorn within you, but that's going to grow if you cultivate that idea. You know, you get to no trust but verify. You get to separate money and state, and all these just amazing truths, you know, that come out of the Bitcoin community.
No, the paradigm of pure physicalism, right? Where Yuval Harari is saying, "Oh, I've never cut open a man and seen a soul inside of him, therefore it does not exist." It's like, well, you know what else you haven't seen? You haven't seen mathematics. You haven't seen the laws of physics. You haven't seen even the Fed funds rate, right? Like our lives are governed by these unseen principles. And this is where the study of economics is so important. You could read a book like Economics in One Lesson. That's his first lesson, the seen versus the unseen, right? You see the guy break the window and you see the glass maker, the glazier getting more work. And you think, oh, breaking windows is good for the economy. Clearly, right? Because the window was fine. The guy didn't have work. Then we broke the window. Now the guy has work. So the GDP went up, right? No, what you didn't see is the guy that had to pay the glazier, all the lack of consumption or investment he could do because he had to pay for fixing the window instead of doing something new. Yeah. Right? So it's unseen principles that govern the scene.
Yes.
Yes.
And anyone that's saying that, oh, I never could have been a man and seen a soul, like that is the most ignorant, in the scope of like human history, wisdom traditions, that is the most ignorant comment you can probably make.
Exactly.
Truly bananas. So we should get to you guys. You are Bitcoin content creators, obviously motivated by much deeper passions, I guess we would say, if I'm safe to use that word. Before we get into like the films that you've made and some of the other content that you've done, maybe I could just hear a little bit about your journey into Bitcoin. You mentioned you've learned a lot from Bitcoiners. You think it's leading to like an awakening of some sorts or an elevation of human consciousness. What was your path from these sort of communistic, propagandistic roots into becoming Bitcoin content creators?
Well, for me, it was 2012, late 2012, early 2013. I was watching Max Kaiser report, Russian television, one of my favorite shows, and he started talking about it. And at the same time, I had a hosting provider, and they always, every time I'd go to pay my monthly bill, they would always, have Bitcoin over there. And I was like, what is this? Watching Max Kaiser, I started to see, okay, separate money and state, money that the state doesn't control. First of all, that just blew my mind. How can that be possible? Because we traveled a lot, being from Romania, we went back and forth. And, I remember before the euro, like when you'd go to Europe, there'd be 20 currencies. You'd have you land in Switzerland, you got to change those francs into Deutschmarks. And so the idea to me that there could be a currency that was not minted by a government, that blew my mind. And so instantly in 2013, I just jumped right in that rabbit hole, and I never came out. I remember telling her, but this was before we had kids. So we actually, discovered Bitcoin before and immediately started, trying to live on what would be later called the Bitcoin standard. But at that time, it wasn't really formalized. So it was really to separate money and state. During that time, I believe the main propaganda that I was witnessing that just drove me hard was the Maidan revolution in Ukraine, where the CIA essentially hired a rent-a-mob to depose and that's the root of the conflict that we have now. And this was at that time, as I was discovering Bitcoin. I remember having so many conversations with Americans, like normie Americans, who were like, Putin's so evil and Putin's so bad, and we got to go to war with Russia. And, they were unaware of the fact we were in Romania at the time and in Moldova, in that region. We knew for a fact that the whole revolution was a complete rent a mob, you know, and it led to this conflict, right? And again, for me, that was highlighting the importance of money. And they were doing that again with the fiat money, which is printed, goes straight to the security state, because their first primary objective is to maintain their power at all costs. And that involves making sure that the candidates you want in all these Eastern European countries, you know, we'd see the meddling hand of the empire, you know, and we'd see the damage and destruction, because a lot of that money would go to oligarchs, nefarious people in the country people in the country are like, these are the worst people, but now they're the richest people and they rule over us. So for us, all these things were happening as we discovered Bitcoin.
And of course, just to add to that, you know, I remember the first time he told me about it, we were sitting together talking, and he's like, so there's this thing called Bitcoin. I'm like, what? You know? And honestly, my first thought was like, oh, it's like a stock. It's like an asset. You know, I mean, why would I think it was anything different, right? But at that time, you knew more about how broken money is. I didn't. So for me, it was more like, well, this is neat. We can get some, and you know, hopefully it'll go up in value like a stock or something like that. Later on in my Bitcoin journey, personally, when I understood just how broken the money system is, how those closest to the money printer are the ones benefiting the most, and then also just, you know, how can they just print money? We have to live within a budget. We have to live within certain means. Everybody does. Why does the government not? You know, who's holding them accountable? And when I understood that, I understood even more. Really, that's where my rabbit hole happened, I guess, where I understood, wait a second, Bitcoin is none of what I thought it was. Bitcoin is something very different. And not only that, but it has the power through the community, which, thank God for the Bitcoin community, we've been exposed and we've adopted so many other elements of the Bitcoin way of thinking just about the world, about the food you put into your body. And although I had a lot of that previously, but I didn't tie it in the way that I'm weaving it in now into this tapestry that I see as the future, really, the future of sovereignty. And again, tying it back to how we leave that, or how do we instill that for the future generations. So that was my Bitcoin journey, you know.
Same for me, honestly. Like, I had some of the health, like I was very health conscious. I like to work out and take care of myself, but then getting into Bitcoin, you're like, oh, wait a minute. It just takes it to a whole nother level. Like, oh, that's why all the food is poisoned. Like, I even knew about the money printing problem. Like, I had like Jekyll Island in my background. I'd read that book a long time ago, but I hadn't connected all the dots, so to speak. Bitcoin really helps you connect a lot of these dots. And then somehow the general theme seems to be that people start making transformations in their life, right? You start, again, I always say, make a list of like what's good in your life and what's bad. And Bitcoiners just start marking off what's bad and start adding to what's good. And everyone's a little different, but it tends to be, you know, towards fitness and family and health and low time preference and away from the state and all of these things. And you just see people having more kids. You know, Bitcoiners tend to be flourishing humans. And that is probably the most powerful thing about it. Like, it's one thing to get into the Bitcoin philosophy and all the abstraction and the history, but to actually see it tangibly changing people in real time has been mind-blowing for me and transformational in my own life. I just really have enjoyed it, learned a lot. Let's talk about, we'll start with the films, I guess. The films largely, and I haven't seen them, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like they are often related to the moral or ethical implications of money. Let's start maybe this is not true for all of them either. Should we start with The Money Changers in the Temple? Very provocative title. What is this film about? What is the core message? And what should people expect if they go to see this film?
Well, Money Changers in the Temple looks at the symbolic and angle of Jesus's very famous entering into the temple on the Passover and just creating a chaotic scene in which he flipped the tables and verbally assaulted the money changers. We were looking symbolically at it, and we said, well, who are the money changers? Because when we talk in Bitcoin, I hear like bankers a lot. You know, the bankers are doing this. All wars are banker wars. You know, and then those are truths that you come to accept as a Bitcoiner. But then you say, could these money changers possibly be the same ideological descendants? Are the bankers the ideological descendants of the money changers? And they're this war that's being waged against us between good and evil through the generations. Could this be one of the main characters? And the answer was that absolutely, you know, because of the fact that the Bible tells us very clearly, not just once, not just twice, not Jesus, not just the Apostle Paul, but literally the entire Bible is the message that our bodies are temples of God. Our bodies are temples of God. Even when the disciples came to Jesus and said to him, hey, tell us about when you'll come back and when you'll return. You know, people like to argue about what he says next, but people always skip one very important sentence over there that Jesus says, the kingdom of God does not come through observation. So we're arguing about the apocalypse and Armageddon, but Jesus said it does not come through observation. He says the kingdom of God is within, right? And then he proceeds to describe that the second coming of Christ is the personal transformation of individuals who it becomes conscious to them that the kingdom of God is within. And so therefore they embark on this journey and they transform their lives. This is the kind of alchemy, you know, in esoteric wisdom traditions, this personal transformation is called alchemy. So the money changers are trying to enter the sacred space, which is sacred because God lives there. And that's where we commune with God. And they data mine it, and they surveillance-based advertising model. They're bombarding us through the eyes, through the ears, through the senses. And I see that as the invasion of the temple that Jesus was referring to. And that's only one vector of battle, because the money changers are battling us there, but then physically they're injecting us with things that we don't want in our bodies. They're forcing us to eat foods that are poison and not even to ask questions about it. So now you see that the body, the temple, is being attacked on many fronts. Right? And then this will all lead eventually, transhumanism is going to be the holy grail of the temple of God no longer being, the body no longer being the temple of God. God cannot reside within you. Once you have a computerized model, you've become, now you're not an analog being. You're an analog digital hybrid being. And we don't know the implications of that spiritually for humanity.
Yeah, no. Also the manipulation of weights and measures, right? Wasn't this this was the activity that the money changers were engaging in inside of the temple, as I understand it. And they were actually, you know, the weight says one thing, but the actual measurement is another. They were tweaking the weights and measures, which is effectively what a central bank is doing in the sphere of money, at least, that they're taking this unit of account, at least one of the functions of it, and they're manipulating it, right? So when you're printing money, you're basically signaling to the economy that there are more goods and capital available than there actually is, right? You're creating the illusion of more capital in existence. So then people start to invest and plan for the future. And then when that economic reality is ultimately uncovered, there's a giant recession, right? This is the Austrian business cycle theory. So and that is invading the temple too, right? That because you're invading the mind, right? The entrepreneurs that are actually solving problems for humans in the real world, well, they're led by these price signals, and they think, oh, well, there's enough money available, enough credit available. Well, that means there's enough stuff available.
And
that's the signal.
Decisions are impacted by that.
Exactly. And then they take risk to try and go solve problems for humans in the real world. But because they're led by illusory signals, that they ultimately fail.
Exactly.
So you're invading the minds of entrepreneurs, which then inhibit their ability to solve problems for real people. And that's crazy, right? That's unbelievable that we allow that still.
And that's why it's so important, back to the whole title of the show, to define money, to define what it is to be aware. You know, none of this is going to make sense if we don't know what the definitions of things, concepts, manipulation, whatever it is, if we don't know what the definition is, and if we rely on the outside sources, right, and the government to define that for us, how do we understand inflation? How do we understand recession? How do we understand just money itself?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent point. And I've often framed it as an attack on human rationality, right? Especially the wokeism thing, where what is a man, what is a woman? It's like you're attacking the most fundamental building blocks of language, as imperfect as it is. But if we can't distinguish between man and woman, then what rational discourse can we possibly engage in? It's like a rug pull on, human rationality or science. And that one it is, as you said earlier, more insidious, right? Because it's less, we're the government, do this because we said so. And it's more of this, like, we're wrapped in compassion and like, oh, this is because we care about equality and like there's all these layers of bullshit that people then need. Not only do you need to get people to realize, hey, you're this programmable entity, and then the war is for the human mind, so watch out. But now you also need to get them to penetrate the layers of bullshit they're being sold. And that's a tall order. That's a tall order for a lot of people. So
it almost feels like one of the reasons I ask myself, why would they push something so absurd, like to convince someone that they're a different gender, right? I almost can't frame that. And then I say to myself, well, if I think about it from the angle of a propaganda master, then I would do that to test the programmability and the efficiency of my system. Yeah. Because if I see them in herds just accepting it, then I'm like, check, right? Next absurd idea. And how do I continue to keep them in the state of believing just absurdities?
And the integrity of the nuclear family is under attack. Like if the child, in certain states, like in California, if the child says, my gender is X, and parents say, no, your gender is Y, then the state will like intervene and say, oh, well, if, we'll take this child and do the surgery. Like, it's actually truly scary at this point. And it's all back to just the language. It's just, biology, the XY chromosome pairs don't care what you say. It's like you are male or you are female. Now, people always want to get into these edge cases, and it's 99.99% of the time, this is true. You want to talk about the edge cases? We'll talk about the edge cases. But for 99.99% of humanity across all of human history, this chromosomal truth is true. Doesn't matter what words you call yourself this, call yourself that, doesn't matter.
But not when you tell someone everybody has their own truth.
Exactly. You've relativized truth.
It's relative.
Right,
your truth can be that.
Bullshit.
And exactly. So like, again, getting back to the definition and the absolutes, no, that's pretty scientifically discernible. Like, we can see that. That is a truth. That's something that's there. So if we can't agree on that, we can't have consensus on that, then it's very easy to not have anything to anchor on.
And that's the attack on consensus, because, the state is dominant in this physical sphere because it is the monopoly on violence. So one of the greatest dangers to the state is a unified populace. So if a population has consensus on terminology and other things, well, then they can be resistant to the state. But if they're divided amongst themselves, then the state is effectively divided and conquered. And it's very strange these times we're living in.
And going back to consensus, though, and that's one of the things that we do talk to our kids about, is because a child will always ask a very innocent question, and you have to be prepared to answer it authentically and truthfully, right? Yeah. And my son the other day, he's like, I know everybody pays taxes, right? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, but do you guys get to decide, where that money goes, and like if the government wants to use it to have a war or something? And for a moment there, I was stuck. I'm like, well, do we? We do elect, representatives and senators and everything, but like, do we? No. So where's the consensus? There isn't consensus in this country based on certain things and policies and everything that's, basically being thrust. Was there consensus on COVID? For what we should accept and how we should be labeled as vaxxed or unvaxxed? No.
There's no consensus on people getting taxed either, right? No one consented to that.
Right.
But there's no consensus nor consent, basically.
Nor consent, exactly. Right.
And that the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah. And I can't help but think that when you allow a government to print fiat money, you give them the root key to human consciousness, to society. Yeah. Because now they can change the language with enough money. You can make any change that you want. In Propaganda Machine, we talk about how a producer EQs the sound, you know, even here they'll be EQing. And fiat money is how you EQ a society.
Yeah.
You amplify certain voices,
That's right.
they're amplified. And if they're the ones, the absurd thoughts, the absurd ideas you want people to believe, and then you mute traditional things, divine, there's a divine nature, there's a divine world. No, that stuff's all muted. We amplify these things, and that's effectively how you program people.
Yeah.
And
The
censor
ultimate
them.
tool for social engineering, and leads to that relativization of truth you described earlier. And the truth about truth is it is what it is, and you either bend to its will or you live a lie. There is no my truth, your truth. Like I've taken issue with that with a number of people that say that, typically on the West Coast. Sorry guys, but that's total bullshit. Stop. The truth is not property. It cannot be owned. It cannot be possessed. It can only be related to.
Exactly.
And typically it's beyond, it's almost always beyond full comprehension. I think it's beyond knowledge, basically. And that is there's a divine struggle there too, right? Like we always want knowledge to be closer to the truth, armed with the knowledge that it can never be the truth, right? The map can never be the territory. And that realization protects you from the totalitarian, utopian, this is the final plan, let's just all eat bugs and live in the pod, this is the final solution type of thinking, because you know that no one can have knowledge that is final in nature. Knowledge is always provisional and helpful to let us relate to reality, but it cannot encapsulate the totality of reality.
That's right.
And I think that's encoded in the wisdom traditions often too, right? It's all in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's not something that can be owned or possessed. Basically.
And that's why you can't make a graven image out of God, because God is infinite truth, and he can't be encapsulated into an image, right? But if you think about it, he can't be encapsulated into a dogma either, right? Because a dogma is a kind of a graven image.
Right.
And so, yeah, absolutely. I think there's an agreement between Christianity and ancient wisdom traditions that truth is infinite, and that part of our journey, that hero's journey, is to access that truth and to, transmutate, ignorance into wisdom.
Yeah, through action, right? No one comes to the Father except through me, something Christ said. So you have to actually imitate that guy, be like that guy, and that's how you bring the kingdom of heaven into the world. The other film you guys have, titled God and Bitcoin, tell me, I'm detecting a common theme here. Tell me what that one's about.
That was our first film, actually. Money Changers was the second. And the reason we made God and Bitcoin was because, as I mentioned, I got into Bitcoin in 2013. So I've done a lot of attempted evangelizing to people, right? It's a lot of it fruitless. A lot of it just fruitless.
This is for Bitcoin.
For Bitcoin.
Okay.
For Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like I've been telling family, I've been telling, and early on, I was way more fervent in my desire to tell people. Nowadays, I actually don't really say much. If they ask me, I'll tell them about it. But, and I was thinking, why are these people I'm telling, most of them were from Christian communities, in North Carolina and Georgia, where we lived at the time. And why are they so resistant? And I thought, well, because everyone's trying to tell them that Bitcoin is like a stock and Bitcoin will go up in value. And they kept attaching all these monetary qualities to it. And the truth is, most of the people in our community, they're pretty well off. They're, coders or doctors or lawyers, and they really don't have financial problems, right? They have a nice bank account. They make good income. And so they're like, okay, fiat works for me, right? And so in God and Bitcoin, we try to address the morality. Okay, fiat might work for you on a practical level. You have a nice house, you drive a nice car, but are you comfortable with the fact that your money is going to start wars? Are you comfortable with the fact that your money is going to propagandize children for gender identity? And there are all these things that are happening with use of fiat. It's not about rejecting Bitcoin. Was the idea of, if you reject Bitcoin, you're accepting fiat. There's no just rejecting Bitcoin, because it's an acceptance. You're saying, I'm okay with fiat blood money. Yeah. Okay. And I'm okay with the wars that they don't even tax us for, right? They just create the money. So it's even deception on top of deception, violating consent. And so that was the idea of God and Bitcoin, was to show Bitcoin not as a monetary instrument that will help you make money, but to see that it has other qualities. There's a morality attached to it. And, by rejecting it, you're saying that it's okay for me to continue to use, fiat.
Beautiful. Do you want to give your kids a foundation of freedom and understanding of Bitcoin and a healthy skepticism of government? Then you should try Tuttle Twins. It's a cartoon about a grandma with a time-traveling wheelchair who takes her grandkids on hilarious adventures to learn about economics and freedom. Think the education of Magic School Bus meets the comedy of The Simpsons. With Tuttle Twins, your kids can learn about Bitcoin from Satoshi Nakamoto, civil disobedience from Harriet Tubman, natural rights from John Locke, and how to destroy the economy from Karl Marx. Today, Hollywood greenlights a lot of woke content or mindless garbage. Each episode of Tuttle Twins is parent-funded, parent-vetted, and only released when it's parent-approved. Because Tuttle Twins is fan-funded, it was the world's first kids show to teach about Bitcoin. That episode alone has been seen over 40 million times and was tweeted about by Michael Saylor. You can watch episodes of Tuttle Twins for free right now. And if you like what you see, you can use code BREEDLOVE for 10% off a subscription to the Angel Studios app and watch all of the episodes. So go to angel.com/breedlove to discover Tuttle Twins today. And remember to use code BREEDLOVE for 10% off. One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. Kalshi is the first legal prediction market in which you can bet on the outcome of any future event that you're interested in, such as the US presidential election, inflation rates, or when the next version of ChatGPT will be released. Let's say you think Trump will win the US presidential election, and let's say the market is pricing his odds of winning at 50%. So you can then buy 100 shares of a Trump victory at 50 cents each, so that would be $50 for 100 shares. And if you're right, you will get $100 back and double your money. But you could also sell early. If Trump's odds of winning went up to, say, 70%, you could sell for 70 cents each and lock in a $20 profit. And even if you don't want to trade, you can go and just watch the live odds to see who is more likely to win the race. And Kalshi has hundreds of markets just like this for you to go and play in. So go to kalshi.com/breedlove today to start playing in this predictions market. The first 500 traders who deposit $50 will get a free $20 credit. Again, that is kalshi.com, kalshi.com/breedlove. I had this experience the other day just driving home that feels like we're oftentimes shouting into the void about this. Like, my thought was that if you could just take the very simple idea that holding your purchasing power in fiat currency is what funds all this warfare. Yes. And if you just move your purchasing power from fiat into Bitcoin, you can boycott the warfare. Exactly. Like, it didn't take that many words to say that. Like, obviously there's a lot behind it to get your head around. It sounds like maybe a ridiculous claim to say that if you haven't done the work to understand Bitcoin, the nature of money, etc. But that little idea that I got in just a few words, if you could somehow disseminate that, the shit would be over, right? Almost everyone would boycott war. Like, there's a few sadistic, pathologically ideological people in the world. I don't know how many that maybe really want to exterminate and do all this stuff, but most of the people I've interacted with in my life, like, I think they would boycott the war if they actually had that knowledge and had the courage to do it. I mean, this is where the job of the artist is so important. Like, how do we disseminate that idea? Is it is that, I mean, this is what you guys are trying to do. It sounds like with filmmaking, but like what, I don't know, tell me something about that. Like it frustrates, I feel deep frustration in the fact that it's such a simple idea. If you could just disseminate it, it seems like it would solve the war problem largely, maybe not completely, but largely. Yet that simplicity does not apply to the real world for some reason. And that feels frustrating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a simple thing, and that's something we're still working on, and we're crafting our message. We're looking at how people respond. But yeah, see, because for me, that was so simple that I adopted it almost instantly when I understood. And so I struggle to understand, like, I'll tell my brothers about it. You know, we're pretty genetically similar, and you'd think we think relatively similar. But there's a hesitancy, and there's just, I don't know, it's very difficult to understand. I think it's just evidence of how much the propaganda, how deeply rooted it is. We've been propagandized so much that it's like a fish in water. It's hard to believe. It's hard to imagine yourself outside of the fiat system.
Right. Yeah, because those we fish have never broken the surface, right? Yeah. We're completely immersed in fiat from birth to grave, basically.
And every part of our lives has been touched by fiat propaganda, right? Every single aspect of it.
But you're not shouting into the void when you start with the children. You're planting the seed. You're planting the concepts. Like I remember the first time we told our kids the word sovereignty. That's a hard word for a kid to get. Like, what is that exactly? Am I going to be king? You know, what is that? Well, again, this is the stuff, like you said, when a baby's already within 36 hours, like imitating your expressions, your face and everything. And they've done so many studies with that. Well, what are you doing if you don't start early with teaching these concepts to your children, which ultimately is the most important thing. Our friends and family may, hopefully, or may not see what Bitcoin is and what fiat is. But can we start working on these minds? Yeah. Can we blast the Free Europe on the window, put the radio and blast it regardless of what the consequences can be, because they are our future, they are the generation. So I don't feel like it's ever pointless or you should be discouraged about it. I think every opportunity to at least expose them to that, because that's going to be the foundation on which they will build. And teaching them, I always reference this, about lying, right? I mean, because that's something obviously you're going to struggle with as a parent, probably into their teens, and it might get worse then, right? But
they might be politicians. And
oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, the way they start negotiating with you, like, are you serious? But for the reason, one of the greatest things about Bitcoin is its transparency, right? We believe that's one of the fundamental things. It's transparent. We can see everything. It's there. It's immutable. Nothing is hidden. That's how you need to live your life with your relationship, on the vertical with your God. And then you need to be truthful. You need to be a person of integrity and character. Your words, the language, the choice of words that you use, you need to stand behind that, So I think that even at times when we are disappointed, and, I'll get texts too, like, oh, Bitcoin just went down. What are you guys going to do about it? Oh, well, okay. Sell it all. But because again, the mind has not,
It's almost like they feel sorry for us, right? Like sometimes I almost get like they might, there's
you said it's going to go to the moon, and it hasn't.
They buy Bitcoin and, they're into that, but poor guys, they don't know that it's criminal money, or it's, whatever idea has been planted into their head. It's like they almost, that's why I don't talk about it so much with the close friends anymore, because it's like, let them have their opinion,
Yeah, the texts I get from like arm's length people are often hilarious. Like, are you okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you?
Well,
are you with it?
I'm better than ever. As I say, like, it goes down, I buy more. It goes up, I'm richer. Like, I can't lose, basically.
But also bring to them the, and again, referencing history. People used to save their life earnings, and overnight, the purchasing power of those rubles, right, went to nothing.
This is the thing.
So what? You're going to go with, a wheelbarrow to buy a couple of things?
But I love this Schopenhauer quote. He says, every man takes the limits of his field of vision for the limits of reality. It's like, people are like, well, I've never seen that in my life. It's like, well, have you ever opened a fucking history book? Like, your life is not how the whole world works, man. Like, congratulations. You lived during a good time in a good place in history. You don't have to open a history book, frankly. You just look around at other countries at the same time you were alive, and you'll see numerous hyperinflations, bail-ins, bailouts, and all the nonsense. But people, I don't know, intellectually lazy or just herd mentality. I'm not entirely sure, but you brought up price. I think that's the driver ultimately, right? It's like people are just going to capitulate to the Bitcoin price at some point. You know, I don't know if that's chasing the high or what it's going to be, but the arguments don't seems to appeal to a subset of people that are disagreeable somewhat in nature and of a critical thinking mind, but the herd mentality is resistant to anything but price, it seems like.
It really is. Price, and that's why they say you get Bitcoin at the number you deserve, at the price you deserve, right? And eventually, I think they'll all get there, but it's a matter of, again, resisting the propaganda. With us, with the Christian community, it's almost like, unfortunately, you know, there were some of these states and cities, like you said, that did better with COVID, but unfortunately, some of those same places swallow propaganda when it comes to neocon wars and supporting certain political parties in the Middle East. You know, and they're just swallowing that. And so I think part of the resistance, to go back to that previous question, at least within the Christian community, is that somehow a kind of nationalism has been infused into their theology.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. To where they believe like this America is like on God's side. And then if Israel's with us, they're also on God's side.
Yes.
And the propaganda, you know, the way they got this idea into the Christian, you know, consciousness is literally unbelievable, because this idea never existed in ancient Christianity until basically like the late 1800s, 1900s. A new Bible comes out. It has footnotes in it. It has propaganda at the bottom that tells people how to think and how to interpret certain verses. The Schofield Bible. I don't know if you're familiar.
No, I don't know about this.
Yeah, like I'm referring mainly to the Christian Zionist, you know, because I feel like that's one of the greatest tragedies on the planet, is the fact that churches in America are sponsoring genocide in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
And you ask, why are they saying, like, they just mindlessly say, those who support Israel will be blessed by God. You know, they just mindlessly repeat that. Right.
That's the programming.
But they are not looking at the fact that the Torah Jews, as they call themselves, who are the religious Jews, because Netanyahu and his crew are secular. People don't understand that. And the Christians, I don't even think they understand that. That when you're supporting this political party, you're not supporting the Jews, because the Torah Jews are against Netanyahu. And they don't believe that they should have made a state. Right? Because they believe they're in exile. So that's what the Torah Jews believe, that the Messiah, when he returns, will make the state, and that any attempt to create a state before is absolutely forbidden. Yeah. Right? And so when the Schofield Bible came out, it basically injected propaganda into the Bible. It was Oxford Press released it. It was financed by the same groups who were building the state of Israel at the time, 1900s, early 1900s, before World War I. And essentially, America needed to be drawn into the war. And so the lobby said, hey, to England, they said, we'll drag America into the war if you promise us the state of Israel, because Israel was at that time under the British mandate. Right. And they wanted out. They had nothing but problems. And they wanted out, and they wanted America in the war. And so successful propaganda campaign was launched to rewrite the Bible. I mean, it's unbelievable that this happened, but it's absolutely factual. And it literally altered the minds of generations of Christians to the point where we go from the greatest commandment of all is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, to finish the job in signing bombs. Crazy. Signing bombs? I mean, that's it's unbelievable.
Yeah. What's the other part of the great commandment? To love thy neighbor as thyself, right?
Exactly. That's the second part. Yeah. So love the Lord your God and your neighbor, and somehow our senators sit and say that, no, we have to continue. We have to finish the job.
It's truly,
it's horrific.
Yeah, it is absolutely horrific. And man, again, the human rationality totally breaks down, because people start getting into this. They label groups, right? They say, oh, well, whatever side they're on, right? The Muslims did this or the Jews did that. And it's like, wait a minute. there's certain individuals that did things. You can't just categorically say all people did this thing. So now we're going to categorically destroy all these people. Like that's the definition of racism, basically. But people don't get that. They still need to think. It's like we almost have to think in these categories to decomplexify the world, but then we start to mistake the categories for the world, and then that opens people up to being programmed and propagandized.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So like constantly getting people to be like, okay, I know you're thinking in those terms and categories to make it make sense for your brain, but now we need to set those down because that's not the real world. The real world is human action, right? Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yeah, and property rights, and I think it was Sefardine was on your show,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken, and when he framed it like that, it was the first time I really thought about it. Yeah, this is a property rights issue.
It is.
Forget the religion and the race.
Yeah.
Forget all of that.
It's a property thing. Yeah.
It's individuals, and do they have the right to property? And how about these individuals? Do they also have the right to property? And if the answer is no, then there's a problem.
Which is a manifestation, I would argue. I mean, maybe there could be counter arguments to this. I think that's a manifestation of love thy neighbor as thyself.
Exactly.
It's like, I'm going to love myself enough to say that the things that I create, I own. And I'm going to respect you enough as a rational being to also own the things that you own. Like, I'm not going to steal your shit. You don't steal my shit.
And if we do that, we infuse that into a protocol. We infuse a commandment of God, right?
Into a protocol.
Into a protocol which automates it. So now it doesn't matter if I'm a good person or a bad person. It's kind of like coming into Bitcoin.
Exactly.
The greedier you are, doesn't matter. It'll convert it into freedom for everybody else.
Yes.
And when we have laws that are, again, back to our previous conversation, connected to a divine reality, to a truth, to an existential truth outside of ourselves, when our laws are connected, and I feel that's what the founding fathers were trying to connect.
Yes.
And that's why the American Constitution is such a great document and a timeless document. And it stands right now in the way of groups of people who would like nothing more than to destroy that document and our minds from ever, from the truths that are contained within it.
So true. And then the protocol that you're describing is Bitcoin, and it creates that by anchoring into that unseen reality again, the laws of physics, thermodynamics, mathematics. It's anchored into that world to give us this very real thing, the strongest form of private property we've ever had. And it also is, I mean, again, people could argue with this, but I think it is a system of ethics energized by economic incentives, because if a system of ethics is what is permissible for any particular person to do to any other particular person in any particular time or any particular place, Bitcoin makes that the idea of stealing less possible overall. So it's ethic. It's energizing a non-stealing ethic by virtue of its existence. And it's doing it through incentives, but the incentives are anchored into the laws of physics, mathematics, thermodynamics. It's a mouthful, and it's a little bit complicated, but it's also fucking miraculous. It's like, wow, how did that actually... You took this ideal that we had, private property, and made it very real, right? Up until this point, we just needed to all pretend together that it existed. But now it really exists. It exists in something that's, well, the strongest thing we ever had, basically.
Yeah. A protocol that's available to everybody.
Yes. Tell me about Esoteric Money. There's another one of your films.
Esoteric Money looks at both the hidden symbols on the money and then the hidden uses of money. It's a very short film. It's only 4 minutes. Our first two films are like 35 to 40 minutes, but our second two films are 5 to 10 minutes. And we want to make them more digestible. And again, it's trying to show that, first of all, why are there these strange symbols on our money? What does transacting value have to do with very strange symbols? And then those symbols, and then how is the money system used? There's also kind of an esoteric angle there, because again, it's a tool of control. And most people, when they're using money, they're not thinking about the fact that it's a tool of control. So in that film, we're looking at, how money is used to shape society and how its actual intent is kept secret. For example, inflation is a very secretive kind of action, right? Because you're not asking for permission to do something, as democracy would require you to do. You're printing the money, and then you feel the effect, and that effect is hidden. You don't understand later on, when the effect comes, that printing of the money that we did then has caused this current situation here.
Yeah, that dislocation in time and space is a real problem. because then that opens up the opportunity for the government to blame typically producers, right? Like I always refer to this one, but when Joe Biden was still with us, during the Super Bowl, he did the ice cream commercial, right? Where he's like complaining about the price of ice cream, saying, "Oh, I love eating ice cream, but these ice cream producers have increased the price of ice cream, and I'm not going to let them do that anymore." It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, if anyone understood this at all, this guy would just get like, I don't know, laughed off stage or something. Like, it just wouldn't. You couldn't say things that were so blatantly false in front of how many people watch the Super Bowl? 50 million? I don't know the number, but people don't get it, so they accept it. Don't know what to do about that. Your other film is called The Propaganda Machine.
Yeah, Propaganda Machine, which again looks at how money is used to EQ society and to shape, amplify voices, mute certain voices. And, it's done through the media is the most obvious place, but it's also done in our universities and in our schools. So that's why you wonder, why do kids go to college to learn communism? Why is communism infused in sociology and in all of the subjects? And I remember I was in college, in the late 90s, in undergrad. And, at that time, my dad was constantly warning me about the, education system, that it's left-leaning and that, the things that they teach you there are actually harmful. But I remember going and studying sociology and the haves and the have-nots, and thinking as a young student, this makes so much sense. Like, of course, there's two groups of people, and I remember myself being drawn into that in my college career, and that's exactly what happens to most. Even though I had a father who, from a communist country, who was basically telling me to watch out for that, it was still getting seduced into it through the things you're asked to read and the papers you're asked to write. So, the universities, the media, the church, unfortunately, is drawn into the national narrative. It's Jacques Ellul is the author, one of my favorite authors, and he talks about how the church is drawn into, there's a war. How does the church? What's the church? And they're drawn to the righteous causes. They're the first, almost like the lowest hanging propaganda. Oftentimes, is pulled. The religious people are pulled in because they have big hearts, and so if you frame it correctly, you can deceive them and get them to engage in things that otherwise are morally reprehensible.
And I would add to that, it's also easier, getting back on the topic of propaganda and part of this film, like you said, basically muting the dissenting voices, right? Amplifying the narrative of the agenda, whatever it is, muting those. That's why it's so critical to take the time to have an actual real conversation with interesting people you meet. And what do I mean by that? My entire worldview was changed when I visited Israel. I visited Israel several times. And on one of those trips, we took the time to our driver was actually Palestinian and wonderful person. And he, drove us around a couple of days and all that. And then he said, "Well, would you like to meet my family? Would you like to come over for dinner?" And I remember at the time I'm thinking, I'm not sure this is such a good idea, but why not? Like, why not? Because the conversations that had been ongoing on those days, I started to see him as not just the driver, not just from the other side, but a human being. Was a father, a husband, a son of somebody. And so we accepted the invitation and we went in an area that was, where they lived, and were embraced with the warmest, most sincere and authentic hospitality and grace and just openness that it blew my mind. That was a moment in my life that I will never forget. And I saw them sitting, and it was the whole family. They had they butchered a sheep for us and all of that. And I mean, and we all
they
sat
weren't
to,
them anymore. They were the us.
They
at that point.
they became
The
us.
Yeah.
Hey, like he and his wife was attending university, like. And we couldn't converse. He was the only one that spoke English, so we couldn't. He would translate for everybody else. But it was such a beautiful moment of transformation for me personally that I realized that, they have the same struggles as me.
Yeah.
They're facing the same obstacles as me. They have the same joys and the same sorrows. And when they lose somebody, they're going to cry just like me. Our tears don't have different chemical makeup, right? It's the same. It's the same. And I think that's the problem, you know, when you don't take the time to have these conversations and to learn from someone and have that openness. It's not going to be distilled by the media for you. It's not going to be distilled by the government for you, and the truth's not going to be given to you. So, you know, that kind of ties into what you also said earlier about, you know, how do you get people to you know, listen and to adopt things? Well, it's having these conversations.
Listen to them first.
And that's one of the things I think you mentioned in one of your shows, why you took the format from like the Zoom format at the beginning of What is Money to actually having the in-person. You know, maybe it's more difficult, obviously, for production, but there's that opportunity to have that conversation. Have the conversation that lasts longer than the characters that you can post in a post on social media or the Twitter post. You know, have the conversation. You said the other day about like, if you still can meet somebody who lived under a communist regime or a totalitarian regime, talk to them. Yeah. You know, talk to the 90-year-old woman who lived under that or something, learn something. So it's not laziness maybe that keeps people from having that transformative opportunity. It's maybe the fact that, you know, they're just not really taking the time
being
because
disconnected.
Yeah, being disconnected. Yeah. And that's, you know, ties back into one of the books that I read recently, that by Seb Bunny, The Hidden Cost of Money. And one of the things, yes, you did. And one of the things that he, again, just had a huge impact on me when I was reading it was the fact that he has a specific chapter on parenthood and, you know, talking about taking the time. We're so busy. We're constantly so busy. Just like the friends that don't see the need for Bitcoin because fiat's working for them because they're so busy in that. Why would they take the time? You know?
Yeah, what they're not seeing is how much they could be flourishing on a Bitcoin standard, right? You just take good as good enough in a way. And yeah, the point well taken on authentic human connection, like in the same physical space, looking people in the eye, like that is magical, right? And this is why, like, I think traveling with your children is so important too, to get them to not have this prejudice, right? Or this whatever story version of the world they have thought up until that point. And this is true for adults too, right? Like you go traveling, all that your story is going to change, right? You're going to see the world differently. You're going to see yourself differently. You're going to see other people differently, like as you described. And yeah, the struggles that are going on over there, it is truly horrible. And I feel, again, this is as an American that did swallow that propaganda for years and not think about it until really Bitcoin and my wife encouraging me to look at it more closely, to realize, fuck, I was totally sold on a psyop, basically, and just never paid attention to it. And now, like the feeling of, what is it? You're like dumb, guilty, both, like, but also some humility that like to be able to just say it and say, yes, I was wrong. Yes, I believe this. Yes, this is the way the world works. Yes, let's do something about it. Like let's not just continue to accept it versus the people that just get entrenched. It's like, oh, well, this is what my parents said and this is what the news said and this is who I am and that's it. It's very, very frustrating. So yeah, that's the Palestinian people, very beautiful, very family oriented, very, you know, food oriented. It's just such a beautiful, vibrant culture. And for us to,
and it was one of the largest Christian populations.
One of the largest
churches
Christian
have all been
populations. I mean, when you really get into the history of like, you know, ancient Babylon and stuff, like all of the civilization and innovation that's come out of that place, it's staggering. Yeah. And, you know, here we are just fucking destroying it, right? We're utterly destroying it and committing an absolute genocide. Like there's no question that at some point in human history, will be regarded, will look back on this time as like, this population of people were this, I don't want to say population, certain power structures or certain people that subscribe to a certain ideology, radical Zionism, I don't know what the title is, were committing genocide on another people. Yeah. And that's how history will regard it, because that's actually what's happening. But the story that's being sold right now is like, oh, it's this defense thing, it's this war, and it's back and forth. It's like, no, that's not it at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, what's the point there? I don't know. Be humble in what you think you know, and be willing to change your beliefs.
Yeah.
And also don't be passive about it and just let it, just like, oh, I'm not involved in that. I don't get involved in politics.
You are involved in it. You're funding it.
You are,
if you hold dollars in a bank account, you're funding it.
Exactly. Like, you don't have to be a politician. You don't have to be an orator. You don't have to be a celebrity. You don't have to be any of that. Yeah. Just realize that you need to be active. You need to take action. And if for nothing else, for your own personal transformative way of looking at the world. Yes. Because when you're having a conversation with that person, it's propaganda free. You know what I'm saying? It's like a space of true human to human connection. And, I've met people even across, Twitter, who are from other areas of the world that have lived through very similar experiences, but our cultures are completely different. Mm-hmm. Everything is completely different, and they're not even Bitcoiners, but we connected on the fact that we saw a similar issue. We had a similar experience. I was at tennis recently, and one of the moms of one of the kids that was playing tennis with our son was like, and she's not somebody who's into politics at all, like at all, and she looks at me and we started conversing about what's going on in the world in general and everything. And she's like, where do I go to get more truth? She's like, I'm watching the news, but I feel like they're not really telling me. And she said it in such a innocent and sincere way, like asking me, like, where do you get more truth, And it wasn't like, how do I get to know God or something very
like actual truth.
It was just
about
like
the world.
Actual truth. And, it hit me hard, because the people who do take the time don't really know where to go. And how to distill that, and how to just, sift through everything to realize, like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. So like you said, your wife told you, like, look into it. Yeah. Look into it. Like, you take the time to look into it, and you did.
Yeah, no, very much. And people are just drowning in bullshit. But I think in general, people have good bullshit detectors. So it's almost like you're in this desert. There's no, like, if, the truth is water, people are like in this desert right now and they just can't find it. Like, where is it? Like, I'm getting fed a bunch of bullshit. Yeah. My detector's telling me it's bullshit, but where's the non-bullshit? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that is challenging. It's increasingly challenging. You kind of have to just triangulate as best you can. That's what my general prescription is like. Well, study the nature of money and the history of money, because that'll help you connect a lot of dots.
Yes.
As they say, follow the money, find the truth, kind of thing. And then, study Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is the latest innovation in money. And that path is like not telling you what's true. It's like, it'll take you on a journey of discovery towards what is more true, hopefully, than what you're consuming now. Almost definitely than what you're consuming now. And, but that, again, people work, people have jobs, people have obligations. Like, a lot of people don't have the interest to spend 100 hours studying the nature and history of money and Bitcoin. Like, they don't. So I don't know. I guess some of us have to do it and then lead by example.
Path to truth is always narrow.
Yeah. The narrow gate.
It's just the nature of truth. Mm-hmm. And that's part of, we have to understand that as we're trying to bring people on the narrow path.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. Before starting the What is Money show, I spent most of my career as a CFO, overseeing internal technology implementations and business acquisitions. Over the next 10 years, it is projected that over 12 million businesses in the US will be sold. If you are an operator running a business generating between $5 and $200 million of revenue, and you're considering selling your business within the next decade, then there is a significant opportunity for you to deploy technology to streamline business processes, reduce operating costs, and enhance the multiple your business ultimately sells for. To this end, I am partnering with the team at Emerge Dynamics, a firm with decades of experience in maximizing the value of privately held, small and middle market businesses. Go to emergedynamics.com/breedlove to learn how you can build an attractive, high multiple company that maximizes your return when you fully exit. Again, that's emergedynamics.com/breedlove. This December 17th to 21st, 2024, join me on the Pacific coast of Mexico for our men's retreat, The Art of Alpha. At this world-class retreat center, we will have daily meditations, movement practices, yoga, cold plunging, infrared sauna, and many other biohacking modalities, all while enjoying world-class cuisine designed for optimal full-body health. The retreat center is a gorgeous biohacker's paradise located right on the ocean. You can think of this place as a nervous system reset facility. At the Art of Alpha, we are seeking men who wish to cultivate freedom, wisdom, sovereignty, physical fitness, truth, and love in themselves and in those who look up to them. If you've always felt motivated to push yourself to new limits to discover the best version of yourself, but you've struggled to find the right community to immerse yourself in, then the Art of Alpha is for you. To apply to join the Art of Alpha, go to breedloveevents.com. Again, that's breedloveevents.com to apply to join us for the Art of Alpha on the Pacific coast of Mexico this December 17th through 21st, 2024. So I mean, we've said a lot of things about Bitcoin and it being a solution to a lot of these problems, but how do you actually, I guess first of all, do you actually unpack this for people? A lot of Bitcoiners kind of give up on the orange pilling at some point, to some extent, right? If someone comes to you and they want to know about it, sure. I think most Bitcoiners are very willing to have that conversation, but a lot of Bitcoiners tend to not want to push the orange pill on people so much, especially after you've been around for a while. You realize that that's not typically an effective approach. How do you unpack the benefits of Bitcoin in terms of it helping people inoculate themselves against tyranny, propaganda, et cetera? Like, what is it? What's your approach with people? If people do come to you and they're curious, how do you unpack it?
I usually start with tyranny because I think man's struggle with tyranny is something that when you look historically has been the predominant struggle. And a lot of the people I talk to might come from a religious background, and, you know, I'll point to tyranny being a main theme in the scriptures as well. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, again, if they're religious, then I go down the road of, you know, church and state, right? That if you're a religious person or a Christian person, then you belong to a church, right? And the church is seen as the bride of Christ, symbolically in the Bible. And honestly, Rothbard had a huge impact on me in understanding, because when I read, it was Anatomy of the State. Yeah, Anatomy of the State. When I read him describing the state, I said to myself, when I study the character of Satan, these qualities are almost identical.
That's right.
Deception, you know, theft, how it operates. And so we wrote an article, Rule by Satan, in which we looked at the kings. Rule by Satan, in which we looked at the kings of the earth. And so what I try when I talk to a Christian person, I try to make him understand, first of all, that having allegiance to any government on the earth is not something scriptural.
That's right.
Okay, because the state is the enemy in the entire Old Testament. And Revelation, the last book in the New Testament, concludes with Christ striking down the nations and destroying the nations, right? And so if the church is the bride of Christ, then symbolically you can understand the state as the bride of Satan. And so I think a lot of Christians, when I explain it to them on those terms, they'll maybe resist me at first, but then they'll go look into the Bible, they'll read the scripture, and they'll be like, yeah, it's pretty undeniable that the kings of the earth, which are the governments of the earth, serve Satan. Now, whether you believe Satan to be an intelligent consciousness or Satan just represents our material desires, it doesn't really matter to me, because both are bad. And so I found that I've gotten some traction. You know, they won't go out and buy Bitcoin, but they do start thinking about the state. And I think that, you know, once they think of the state in those terms, and they see that the state is not your friend. He's not someone, no matter what they say, because the qualities of Satan are going to be to deceive you. Then they start to understand that, wait a second, if the state is so evil, but they're the ones making the money, now hold on a second. Now I'm starting to understand and put the pieces together. So most of the people I talk to are coming from that background. So that's kind of where I find myself, but with the children, it's a little different. We have a different approach.
Yeah, and also with just, mothers or parents, if they're coming to you and having a discussion with you, maybe I'm not necessarily going to start with that, right? Because that might be a little overwhelming when you have just a mom asking you, like,
dads talk.
That's good dad talk for sure.
No, but it really does go back to that, because ultimately, I'll start with like nutrition. Yeah. I'll start with like, hey, what snacks are you feeding your kids? Have you looked? Have you literally, I can't read half the stuff that's on the back of a lot of these boxes and all this processed stuff. Have you literally sat there and looked and seen, should this product have been removed so many steps from its origin? Yeah. No, it should not have. But you're feeding it to your kid. Are you taking the time to? So when you talk about that, and then you tell them, well, who's profiting from that? Who's profiting from? Well, the companies. Yeah, okay. Well, but
most
why
of them think it's price gouging, though.
Yes, it's
why are the
yeah.
prices going?
Why
I
are,
blame the producers.
The chickens stopped making eggs, and that's why all of a sudden eggs are 3 times more. Things of that nature. So having a very tangible conversation and introducing it that way, so that they can get to the point where they're like, they may not run to scripture to look up that verse and see where he's saying that.
Yeah.
But they're going to be like, I just came from the grocery store. I saw the receipt.
You can feel it. Yeah.
I bought this. So what's happening?
I heard Bitcoin fixes this.
Yeah, I feel exactly. So then it's like you open up, and then also as parents, once you have a child, that's another transformative moment in your life, right? You immediately, and especially as moms, we start getting, thinking about every day of their future.
Yeah.
We're already thinking, of that acorn turning into an oak, right?
Yeah.
And we're thinking of that, and we're thinking like, how am I equipping my kid? I'm trying to equip him to be aware of his spiritual being. I'm trying to equip him not to lie, and to be a person of integrity, and to be mindful of how they live and how they treat others. Okay, got that. Check. Wait a second. How do I leave them something that can empower them to be sovereign no matter what happens? Because when I grew up, my grandparents and my great-grandparents had built in the 50s. They built 2 homes in Romania with a nice courtyard and everything between the 2 of them. They worked hard to save that money and to build them. Well, it was just decided one day that the government wanted to build a building there, leveled everything, gave them a 1-room apartment. Yeah. And it's like, you just lost everything. There was no compensation for that.
Wow.
Well, let's assume that would have been what they wanted to pass down to me. Oh, it's gone. Oops. Everything that they worked for, everything that they did, their proof of work,
Gone.
poof.
Robbed.
Robbed.
Completely
And I
robbed.
would have had nothing if that was, the way. And that's how a lot of, Eastern European culture is, that where you pass down the property and the land and that kind of thing, right? So having that conversation with a parent, with a mother, all of a sudden does open her eyes to, okay, well, what is this Bitcoin? So it's not just a stock. It's not something I can just, make some extra $1,000 when it goes up and I sell it no, it's not.
So it's a 1-2 punch. I hit him with the esoteric.
And then I go from the other side.
I love
Practical
it.
day to day.
There's the masculine kind of hyper-rational sort of top-down, like from the mind into the practical approach. And then there's the feminine bottom up, like, oh, you feel this pain. Have you traced it up to its unseen cause,
And
right?
we meet in the middle.
You meet in the
And you
middle.
meet in the
Meet in
middle.
the
That's
middle.
beautiful.
And the orange middle.
Bright orange middle. Bright orange middle ground. So many things came up for me as you were describing. I've never heard it described that way, as the state as the bride of Satan. And again, I'll draw on the work of Rene Girard, who, for those who may think we're sitting here talking about fairy tales, no, Satan is technically defined as the process of victimization, the process of making victims. It can also be, if you make yourself a victim, there's a lot of people that are narcissistic and sort of describe themselves as victims. That can be a process of self-Satanization, but you can also make victims in the real world, right? Through stealing and killing and all these things. And, we talked earlier about how Christ was kind of the revelation of that mechanism to us. I had an episode on it recently, so I won't go back into it now, but I think it was Benjamin Franklin, his family seal said rebellion to tyranny is obedience to God. You know, like that is we are born free. We are free. We can always decide how we're going to respond. Viktor Frankl's final human freedom, right? The ability to choose your response in any given set of circumstances. That does not go away. It cannot be taken away. Nothing can be done to remove that. So that is what is true for us. And so to rebel against tyranny, to just exercise your own autonomy and freedom as an individual is to be godly, right?
Righteous act.
Yeah, it's a righteous act.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then the other thing, you're saying that the state is the bride of Satan. Nietzsche's famous quote, everything the state says is a lie. Everything it has is stolen. It's like, oh, that sounds just like the bride of Satan. Are you kidding me? Of course. And then, you then, I don't know, when you see it that way, it's like you can start to choose. You're getting all these revelations about what these symbols actually mean, maybe a different, more practical view on wisdom traditions or religion as like this moral software, ethical software, something like that you can choose to install, and it will make you resistant against this ideological possession over here. And then you get to like choose how to program yourself. And it's like, do I want to imitate those who engage in these righteous actions?
Becomes conscious, all this stuff.
Right. Or do I want to imitate these current statesmen that are, lying and stealing? Everything they say is a lie. Everything they have is stolen. Like, do you want to imitate that, or do you want to imitate righteous figures, like Christ, like Buddha, like Muhammad, whatever your religion is, right? You're imitating those who took righteous actions. And that seems like a very big step in the right direction of personal responsibility and rejection of tyranny. It's just like, no, I'm not, fuck you, whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do what's right. And it's not that easy, but the money coming out of the hands of the state definitely helps, right? You give individuals, as you were saying, your parents build this thing, all their proof of work, and then the state makes a decision, boom, it's gone. Well, had Bitcoin been around,
Exactly.
their proof of work would have passed forward, right? Their righteous actions, they would have been more able to empower you to carry on the tradition of what they represented themselves to be. Presumably they were doing righteous actions, building that house, consensually working with people, not stealing from people. So these two things, I think, maybe really there's a good, strong confluence there that helps the world become a lot better of a place, is imitating people with righteous action, then empowering those with righteous action to pass forward the fruits of their righteous action to their heirs.
Yes.
We push forward the battle generationally.
Yes.
By being able to do that. Yeah. And Bitcoin is a tool that gives us unbelievable power.
Yeah.
Never had before.
And also getting back to what you said about having the moral upgrade, I love that because, as you said, we are as a whole, we do have these receptors, and these abilities to say this is not right.
Yes.
This is wrong. We may not act upon it, but so if we're already equipped with that, maybe it's just time we need an upgrade, a new version of that software. Maybe, I was equipped with it to identify it in this context, but now I'm seeing it, like I said, years later.
Yeah.
We just changed the characters and we changed the set, but it's the same production.
That's
it's
right.
the same propaganda.
Yeah.
So maybe now I just need to tweak that upgrade. I need to go from version 1.0 to 2.0.
Yes.
So I could better relate and I can better respond and I can better stand firm against it and then equip the next generation.
Yes.
And give them those tools.
Yes, because Satan, the process of victimization becomes more sophisticated, or state propaganda becomes more sophisticated. Back to what we talked about earlier. It's no longer this explicit, we're the government, do this because I said so. It's now, putting this moral camouflage on of, this is because we care about LGBTQ and like whatever.
And no one's safe till everyone's safe.
Yes.
And let's make sure we get that.
It's this very Darwinian game, right? Where the moral software upgrades, but then the satanic software, we'll call it, also upgrades and tries to imitate the Christian software, right?
Inverts it, imitates and inverts,
Right.
and weaponizes it.
Because one of the things Christ gives us is the equality of souls, right? That we are all
Equal.
individuals,
Yes.
we're all sinners of the universe, we all can have a direct relationship with God. Well, then what is wokeism?
Yeah.
It's masked in all this equality bullshit. So it's trying to imitate
It's racism.
the moral sentiments that pervade so it can get into people's head more effectively. So then you need this upgrade you're describing. And it's such a
And we
trip to
have-
look at it that way.
We have cultural cataracts, I feel like.
Yeah.
And kids are getting them earlier. And this is something that, you'd get, unfortunately, as an older person, right? But I feel like what's being done now through propaganda and through the manipulation of younger and younger and younger kids is starting to have their ability to see culture for what it is and what it's doing to them. They're starting to get the cataracts on them. So we need to remove that, let them see truth, equip them to be able to acknowledge that truth and embrace it for themselves. And that's why Bitcoin, I think, is just, it's transformative.
Yes.
It's transformative. It goes far beyond what it is in and of itself and what it does to you
Yeah.
as a human being. And then what then you do, to
Yes.
who you come in contact with and what impact you can have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, again, we're kind of lost in the language here because there's the Bitcoin protocol layer, but the protocol layer is useless without the social layer.
yes,
So like we are the social layer. So like even when we say Bitcoin, it's like fixes this. Like, well, yeah, we are part of that is fixing this. I mean, sure, we're interacting with new incentive system, but it actually is changing people too.
right.
And the other thing that occurs to me is we're using all of these metaphors like moral software and upgrade, like all these digital age metaphors are giving us a better grip on what's actually happening. We couldn't use these metaphors 30, 40 years ago because, we didn't have the tech. People didn't, you don't have this interactive relationship of hardware and software. You can't use that as a metaphor for other things in your mind. So maybe that's happening too, is that we're going through this technological change in technological paradigm. And it's helping us wake up to all the bullshit that's been happening since the dawn of time, right? Which is propaganda and statism and all of its various guises. And maybe we're finally at a place where we can, I don't know, evolve past it. Maybe it never completely goes away, but we've been going the right direction if you zoom all the way out. So hopefully we keep going the right direction, right? Which is away from, ancient Egypt, Pharaoh, God, King, absolute tyranny to U.S. constitutional republic, not democracy. We'll just stick with constitutional republic, right? That was the right direction. Maybe we can go one more step forward with Bitcoin. What do we do? Where do we focus our energy? You've talked about the kids. You've talked about the next generation. That seems like a very reasonable place to focus our energy to be this change we wish to see in the world. Is it just the children? Are there other things? Where else should we be focusing our energy to actually push the world in the right direction?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like if we want to parallel it with our responsibility as Christians, right? To tell others about Christ. And ultimately you can say, you would have succeeded had you only turned one person towards God. That would have been enough. So our energy right now, just in a very practical way, is we're taking it beyond just the conversation that we're having with our friends, our family, acquaintances, and trying to put that into content creation, because we feel if we're not putting something out there, there's plenty of other stuff out there, right? That will sap the energy, take the attention away. So in our own way and on our platform, Escape Hatch 21, we feel that visually, creating these films and writing these articles and doing that will hopefully get someone's attention, get one person's attention, two people's attention, and then they will be able to dissipate that as well. Gotcha. So in a very practical way, that's how I feel like we're now kind of focusing our energy. But as a community, as a Bitcoin community, I've felt so encouraged just attending the conference.
Yeah.
Because I felt like that just opened up, our horizons to really see that there are a lot of people. And
We're not alone.
We're not alone.
in
And
this.
that's extremely encouraging, to have that sense. It empowers you. It just makes you feel like this matters. This really, really matters.
Yeah.
So, that's for the whole entire community, for the entire Bitcoin community, anybody who's putting content out there and who's creating it, keep doing it. Keep doing it, because you never know who else you're empowering.
That's so true.
And you're just encouraging to take that step and create the content or tell someone else about it. And they don't feel alone. We're such an isolated society.
Yeah.
We feel like we're more connected now because of all the tech we have.
Yeah.
But the truth is we're so isolated and so alone in certain ways. So that's what I would say, where to focus the energy for the Bitcoin community is just keep putting out what you're putting out.
Yeah.
Just
Having
keep
an
doing what
impact.
you're doing. That's how you're having the impact. I mean, we're proof of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And a
So-
source of great fulfillment, right? Again,
Yeah.
leading life beyond yourself. The feedback that I have received on some of the stuff that I've written and done on this show, like when people tell me it's changed their life for the better, you get a wash and chills and you're like, thank you for telling me thank you. It's amazing. Like, so in whatever way you can do that, yes, I agree. That is a very strong way to keep pushing it forward.
Yeah, I agree. Education is right now, that's why we're here, is because we were educated. Even though I discovered Bitcoin in 2013, I didn't peak in my Bitcoin knowledge till, much later. I mean, I can't say I'm ever peaked.
Yeah, we never peak.
It's
Yeah.
forever.
It's a bottomless rabbit hole.
I'm still going through it, and it's because of all the great content out there, this show and so many others, that I have learned so much, that we feel ourselves, hey, our community could also use some of this content. How do we distill it? How do we offer it to them? In my community, I was kind of the conspiracy theorist guy. So anytime a global event happens, I get all the calls from people, or anytime Bitcoin goes up too much or down too much, I'd be on the phone like one by one telling people, oh, this is, what's going on. And she said to me, stop talking for 3 hours to this guy and then 3 hours to that guy and then 3 hours. Why don't you just write an article and let them all read it? And I was like,
The voice of reason.
wait a second, that actually makes sense. And that's why I always started writing articles. They were really just for our family and our community, but it kind of kept growing and growing. And that's what we're focused on now, is really educating, because we have been educated, and we're trying to take that same information right now and offer it, in a way that, hopefully our community can digest it.
Amazing. Zephyr Muze, Fractal Bounce. This has been very fun. Thank you for indulging my wild, far out conversational topics of mashing all these things together. Where can people find you guys on the internet?
Our website is eh21.io. I'm Fractal Bounce on Twitter. She's Zephyr Muze. And that's it. Or YouTube, Escape Hatch 21 on YouTube.
Beautiful. We'll link to all that in the show notes. Thank you guys
Thank
for
you
making
so
the trip.
much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
It's been
you.
an honor to be here.
Likewise. Thank you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.